The briefing room fell silent when she walked in. Not the respectful silence afforded to senior officers, but the uncomfortable quiet that comes when nobody knows quite what to say. Major Kestrel, Nomad, Voss carried her helmet under one arm, flight suit sleeves rolled to her elbows, revealing forearms marked with faded ink, coordinates that meant something to her and nobody else. She was 41, a single parent to a 7-year-old daughter, and she'd just been assigned to provide close air support for a SEAL team operation that intelligence said would be routine. The word routine in military operations was like calling the ocean damp. It meant nothing and promised less. The SEALs sat on one side of the room, 6 men whose faces carried the particular weathering that comes from choosing violence as a profession. They didn't look at her with hostility, exactly. More like skepticism wrapped in polite indifference. Their team leader, a lieutenant commander with shoulders like bridge supports, nodded once. That was it. One nod. Not welcome, not dismissal. Just acknowledgement that she existed in the same room. Nomad had learned long ago not to waste energy on first impressions. The A-10 Thunderbolt didn't win beauty contests either, and it remained the most feared aircraft in close air support for a reason. Ugly, slow, built around a cannon that fired depleted uranium rounds the size of bottles. It survived because it was too tough to kill and too effective to retire. She understood that particular mathematics. The mission brief was straightforward on paper. The SEAL team would infiltrate a compound in the Kunar province, where a high-value target was believed to be coordinating attacks against coalition forces. Nomad would orbit overhead, weapons hot, ready to deliver precision fires if things deteriorated. The terrain was unforgiving: jagged mountains, narrow valleys, places where radio signals went to die and helicopters struggled for lift. The A-10 didn't care about thin air. It flew low, ugly, and angry. As the intelligence officer droned through his PowerPoint, Nomad studied the topographical maps, her eyes tracing elevation lines and approach vectors. She noted the compound's position at the valley floor, the limited egress routes, the way the mountains created natural choke points. It looked like a kill box, not for the target, for anyone who went in. When the brief ended, the SEAL commander approached. Up close, she could see the call sign patch on his kit, Ironside. He extended a hand. His grip was exactly what she expected, firm, testing, the handshake of a man who'd made judgments about people based on how they held themselves in small moments. "You got kids?" he asked. The question caught her off guard, not the usual opener. "Daughter, 7. Ironside nodded slowly. "Then you understand what's at stake when you're not there." It wasn't a challenge, it was something else. Recognition, maybe. The pre-dawn darkness over Bagram Airfield was the color of old bruises. Nomad completed her pre-flight walk-around with the methodical precision of someone who'd done it 1,000 times and knew that the 1,001st could always be different. The A-10 sat on the tarmac like a monument to function over form, broad wings designed for loitering, twin engines mounted high to survive ground fire, and beneath the nose, the GAU-8 Avenger cannon that gave the aircraft its terrible purpose. She ran her hand along the fuselage, feeling the patches where armor had been replaced, reading the aircraft's history in rivets and repairs. The crew chief, a staff sergeant named Kowalski who'd been turning wrenches longer than some of his officers had been alive, stood by with a tablet. "She's good to go, Major. Loaded 4 Mavericks, full combat mix on the 30 mic, and enough JP-8 to keep you overhead for 3 hours. Nomad signed off on the maintenance forms. "How's she flying?" "Like a pissed-off angel, ma'am, same as always." She climbed into the cockpit as the sky began its slow fade from black to gray. The seat fit like an old jacket. She ran through her checks with practiced rhythm: radios, weapon systems, flight controls. Each switch, each dial, each indicator was a conversation between pilot and machine. When the engine spooled up, the sound was distinctive, a high whine that matured into a steady roar. Not graceful, not quiet, just unstoppable. "Bagram Tower, Nomad 3-1, ready for departure." "Nomad 3-1, Bagram Tower, winds 270 at 8 knots, cleared for takeoff runway 03. The A-10 rolled forward with increasing speed, and Nomad felt the moment when the wings found purchase in the air. The ascent was gradual, purposeful. This wasn't an aircraft that leaped skyward. It climbed with determination, gaining altitude over the Hindu Kush as dawn broke across the peaks. At 15,000 feet, she leveled off and turned toward the operational area. The radio crackled with the morning's traffic, other aircraft checking in, ground units calling for fires, the orchestrated chaos that was modern warfare. Nomad monitored it all, filing information away, building a mental picture of the battle space. Her mission frequency came alive. Nomad 3-1, Ironside Actual. The SEAL commander's voice was clear, professional. Go ahead, Ironside. We're 30 minutes from insertion. Weather's holding. How's your gas? 3 hours on station, full loadout. I'm your guardian angel whether you want one or not. There was a pause. Then Ironside's response carried something that might have been the beginning of respect. Copy that. Good to have you overhead. The valley appeared below, a slash of shadow between mountains that caught the early light. Nomad began her orbit, eyes scanning terrain, checking sight lines, identifying positions where threats might emerge. This was the part that never made it into the recruiting videos. The slow circles, the waiting, the burden of readiness without release. The insertion went smoothly, too smoothly. Nomad watched through her targeting pod as the Black Hawk settled into the landing zone, the SEAL team flowing out like water, disappearing into the terrain with practiced efficiency. The helicopter lifted off, banking hard to clear the valley, its rotor wash stirring dust that glowed in the early morning sun. Then there was silence, not the absence of sound but the presence of tension. Nomad maintained her orbit at 12,000 feet, high enough to avoid most small arms fire, low enough to bring precision hate when needed. The A-10's heads-up display painted information across her field of view: altitude, airspeed, weapon status, fuel state. Everything green, everything ready. Nomad Ironside, we're approaching the compound. No contact yet. Copy, Ironside, I hold you on thermals. You've got a vehicle moving on the road 2 clicks north of your position. We see it. Looks like a local. Continuing approach. The SEAL team moved with the kind of tactical discipline that came from repetition and survival. Nomad could see them on her screen, heat signatures against the cool ground, bounding forward in pairs, covering each other with overlapping fields of fire. They reached the compound wall, stacked up, breached, and that's when the world caught fire. The radio exploded with controlled chaos. Contact, multiple hostiles, second floor. The sound of gunfire came through the transmission, sharp cracks mixing with the staccato rhythm of automatic weapons. Nomad's hands moved without conscious thought, rolling the A-10 into an attack approach, eyes locked on her displays, building the geometry of violence in her mind. Ironside, Nomad is inbound. Talk me onto target. North side of the compound, second-story windows. Estimate 6 to 8 fighters with PKMs. We're pinned in the courtyard. She could see it now, muzzle flashes blooming in her targeting pod's display like deadly flowers. The compound was larger than intelligence had suggested, more fortified. The SEALs were trapped in an L-shaped courtyard with limited cover, taking fire from elevated positions. Nomad, armed the GAU-8, felt the familiar weight of responsibility settle onto her shoulders. This was the moment that separated theory from execution. The Avenger cannon was accurate, but it was also devastating. Fire too close and she'd kill friendlies. Fire too far and she'd accomplish nothing. The targeting reticle danced across her display as she refined her approach angle. Ironside, I need you to mark your position with IR. IR strobes active now. 2 bright signatures appeared on her screen, clearly separate from the hostile muzzle flashes. The geometry was tight, very tight. Less than 50 meters between friendlies and targets. She'd made harder shots, but never with SEAL lives in the balance. Nomads in hot, keep your heads down. The A-10 rolled into its attack run with the inevitability of an avalanche. Nomad's world narrowed to the targeting reticle, the range counter, the geometric relationships between friendly positions and hostile targets. Her breathing slowed, steadied, each inhalation deliberate and measured. This was the state she'd learned to enter during her first combat deployment 12 years ago, a place beyond fear where only calculation existed. The compound rushed up to meet her, details sharpening through the targeting pod. She could see individual fighters now, men moving between windows, firing down into the courtyard where Ironside's team was pinned. The math was simple and terrible. If she didn't fire, the SEALs would die. If she fired wrong, the SEALs would die. The only path through was perfect execution. 15 seconds, she transmitted, her voice carrying the flat calm of absolute focus. The GAU-8's firing solution locked. The targeting computer painted a predicted impact area across her display. She made a minute adjustment, compensating for wind and the A-10's descent angle. 5 seconds. 3. She squeezed the trigger. The Avenger cannon didn't sound like guns in movies. It made a sound like the world tearing apart, a deep BRRRT that resonated in your chest cavity, in your bones, in your understanding of what humans could create to kill other humans. 70 rounds per second, each round depleted uranium, each round capable of punching through concrete and steel. The north wall of the compound exploded into dust and debris. When Nomad pulled up from her run, the second-story windows no longer showed muzzle flashes. They no longer showed much of anything. The structure looked like something had taken a bite out of it. The radio was silent for 3 heartbeats. Then Ironside's voice came through, rough with adrenaline and something else. Nomad, that was danger fucking close. And perfect. Hostiles are down. We're moving to secure the objective. She climbed back to altitude, hands trembling now with the release of tension. This was the part they didn't tell you about the after. When your body remembered it was supposed to be afraid. Copy Ironside, I'm reestablishing orbit. Let me know when you're ready for extract. We've got secondary objectives to clear. Estimate 20 mics. 20 minutes. She checked her fuel state. Still good. The morning sun was fully up now, painting the mountains in shades of gold and amber. Beautiful country if you ignored the men trying to kill each other in the valleys below. Nomad resumed her lazy circles overhead, watching the SEAL team move through the compound with professional efficiency. They were different now in her targeting pod, not skeptical strangers but men she'd bled for. Men who would remember her call sign. The A-10 droned on, patient and terrible, waiting for whatever came next. The compound clearance took 35 minutes, not 20. Nomad monitored the progress through her targeting pod and clipped radio transmissions. The SEALs moved room to room, methodical and thorough, finding what they'd come for and more. Weapons caches, intelligence materials, evidence of a network that stretched beyond this valley. She was calculating her fuel reserves, running the math on station time versus the flight back to Bagram, when Ironside's voice cut through the routine chatter. Nomad, Ironside. We've got a problem. The tone made her chest tight. Not panic, worse, controlled urgency. Go ahead. Our HVT wasn't here. Intel says he's at a second location, grid November Bravo 472863. We're moving to intercept, but he's getting into vehicles. Multiple technicals heading west en route Sandstorm. Nomad pulled up the coordinates on her navigation system. The new location was 6 kilometers away, deeper into the valley. Her fuel state was amber, not critical but not comfortable either. She ran the calculations. Ironside, I've got 40 minutes of station time before I'm Winchester on fuel. Where's your extract bird? Delayed. Maintenance issue. We're looking at 90 minutes before the backup can reach us. The mathematics were unforgiving. She could stay overhead for 40 minutes, then would have to leave them without air support. Or she could leave now, refuel, and be back in 90 minutes, leaving them exposed for 50 minutes. Neither option was good. What's your recommendation? Ironside asked. The question surprised her. SEAL team leaders didn't usually ask A-10 pilots for tactical advice. Can you interdict those vehicles before they reach prepared positions? Negative. We're 600 meters out and they've got a head start. By the time we're in direct fire range, they'll be dug in. Nomad watched the roads through her targeting pod. She could see dust plumes now, vehicles moving fast, heading toward a cluster of structures that intelligence had marked as abandoned. Except they probably weren't abandoned. Nothing in Afghanistan was ever truly abandoned. I've got eyes on 3 vehicles. They're heading for a compound that'll give them standoff distance and elevated firing positions. If they get there, your approach becomes a killing field. That's my assessment too. She made the decision. I'm engaging the vehicles now. That'll buy you time to close distance. But Ironside, I'm going to be at fuel minimums. If something else comes up after this, I won't have the gas to support you." The pause lasted 2 seconds. "Understood, make it count." Nomad rolled into her attack approach, targeting the lead vehicle. It was a Toyota Technical pickup truck with a mounted PKM machine gun, the insurgent vehicle of choice throughout Afghanistan. Simple, reliable, deadly. The Maverick missile under her wing locked onto the thermal signature. The AGM-65 Maverick left the rail with a solid thunk that she felt through the airframe. She watched its flight through the targeting pod, a streak of fire and purpose, self-guiding toward the thermal bloom of the lead vehicle's engine. The Technical had no chance to evade. No warning. Just sudden catastrophic existence failure. The missile struck just behind the cab, and the vehicle disintegrated in a fireball that rolled black smoke into the morning sky. The explosion was large enough that she knew the Technical had been carrying more than just small arms. Ammunition, probably, maybe explosives. The remaining two vehicles broke formation, one accelerating hard toward the compound, the other reversing direction in a desperate attempt to escape back the way it had come. Amateur hour. You didn't run from an A-10. Running just meant you died tired. Ironside, lead vehicle destroyed. Engaging the runner. Copy. We're 3 minutes from the compound. Nomad brought the aircraft around in a tight turn, her body pressing against the seat as G-forces built. The fleeing Technical was making maybe 60 kilometers per hour on the rough road, kicking up a rooster tail of dust. She armed the GAU-8 again, lined up her approach, and fired a 3-second burst. The cannon shells walked up the road like the footsteps of an angry god, catching the Technical midway through. The vehicle seemed to come apart in sections, first the bed, then the cab, then whatever structural integrity remained. It rolled twice and came to rest as burning wreckage. 2 down. The third Technical had reached the compound and was unloading fighters. She could see them scattering, some heading into structures, others setting up firing positions. They knew what was coming. They'd seen what happened to their friends. They were preparing. Ironside, last vehicle, reached the compound. Multiple dismounts establishing defensive positions. "Can you suppress them?" Nomad checked her weapons loadout. 2 Mavericks remaining. 147 rounds left in the cannon. Fuel state now red, 20 minutes until she had to leave whether she wanted to or not. "I can make their morning unpleasant, but I can't stay long." She selected a Maverick, locked onto a cluster of fighters near the compound entrance, and fired. The missile flew true, impacting with precise violence. Bodies scattered like leaves. The survivors dragged themselves toward cover, their defensive positions disrupted. She followed up with a cannon run, stitching destruction across the compound's western wall. The SEAL team was close now, moving fast across open ground. She could see them through her pod, 6 men in tactical formation, covering each other's advance. They were exposed, vulnerable, depending on her to keep hostile heads down. She made another pass, firing into windows where movement flickered. The A-10 shuddered with the cannon's recoil, that familiar feeling of controlled fury. Her fuel warning light illuminated. 15 minutes. The SEAL team hit the compound entrance with explosive breaching charges that turned the gate into shrapnel. Nomad watched them flow through the breach, smooth as water, their movements speaking of countless rehearsals and hard-won experience. She kept her targeting pod locked on the structure, scanning for threats, ready to bring fire if needed. But her fuel state was critical now. 12 minutes until she'd have to leave, and that was calculated for a straight flight back to Bagram with zero margin for combat maneuvering. The professional part of her brain was already running the numbers on emergency divert fields, calculating whether she could make it to Jalalabad if headwinds were worse than forecast. Nomad, Ironside. We're inside. Heavy resistance, 2nd floor again. These guys were waiting for us. She could hear the gunfire through his transmission, the sharp reports of M4 carbines mixing with the deeper bark of AK-47s. The SEAL team was in close quarters battle now, the kind of fighting where air support became nearly impossible. Too close, too fluid, too much risk of fratricide. "I'm limited on what I can do from here, Ironside. Your danger close on all sides." "Understood. Just keep anyone from reinforcing them from outside. We'll handle internal." It was a polite way of saying, "We got ourselves into this, we'll get ourselves out." SEALs didn't ask for help unless the situation was desperate. The pride wasn't arrogance, it was the confidence of elite warriors who trained for exactly these situations. Nomad reestablished her orbit, eyes scanning approaches to the compound. The road was clear. The surrounding terrain showed no thermal signatures. The only fight happening was inside that structure, and she was helpless to affect it. This was the bitter reality of close air support. Sometimes the closest you could get wasn't close enough. Her fuel warning changed from yellow to red. 8 minutes. Ironside, I'm at fuel minimums. I have to start my egress or I'll be swimming home. The gunfire continued through the radio. Then Ironside's voice, strained but controlled. Copy, Nomad. You've done your job. Get out of here. What's your status? We're winning, slowly. The HVT is barricaded in a back room. We'll have him in 5 minutes. 5 minutes. She had 8 until fuel minimums became fuel emergency. The mathematics were cruel but clear. She could stay and watch them win, or she could leave now and make it home. The smart play was obvious. The loyal play was something else. I'm staying until you've got him. Nomad, that's not. I'm staying. You've got 3 minutes. Make them count. She tightened her orbit, trading fuel efficiency for responsiveness. If something went wrong in those final minutes, if reinforcements appeared or the situation deteriorated, she wanted every second of reaction time she could steal. The A-10 circled like a predator, nearly empty but still dangerous, still watching. The radio crackled. We've got him. HVT is secured. Compound is clear. Time to extract. Birds inbound. 12 minutes. The fuel gauge sat at a number that would have made any instructor pilot have a minor stroke. Nomad had maybe 15 minutes of flight time remaining, which meant her margin for error was measured in heartbeats. The smart move, the only move, was to leave immediately, climb to altitude, and make a straight shot for Bagram. Instead, she maintained her orbit over the compound, watching the SEAL team consolidate their position. They'd stacked bodies near the entrance, hostile KIA, the accounting that came after every gunfight. The HVT was zip-tied and hooded, sitting in the courtyard while Ironside's team secured intelligence materials and photographed the site. Professional work, executed under pressure. Through her targeting pod, Nomad watched a SEAL medic working on one of his teammates. The IR signature suggested bleeding, body heat escaping where it shouldn't. Not life-threatening probably, but enough that the man would need proper treatment soon. The extract helicopter appeared as a radar contact, then as a visual, a Black Hawk threading between mountains, flying tactical, staying low to avoid potential threats. Nomad's radio crackled. Nomad, Ironside, birds 2 minutes out. You should be halfway to Bagram by now. I'll leave when your wheel's up. That's not smart flying, Major. Good thing I'm paid for effective flying, not smart flying. She heard something that might have been a laugh cut short. The Black Hawk flared into the landing zone, rotor wash creating a dust storm that obscured her targeting pod's view. She switched to FLIR, watching heat signatures move toward the aircraft. The SEAL team loading their wounded, their prisoner, their captured intelligence. 30 seconds. The helicopter's turbines changed pitch, preparing for takeoff. Her fuel light was solid red now, accompanied by a pleasant automated voice suggesting she might want to consider finding a runway soon. 20 seconds. The Black Hawk lifted, banking hard to clear the valley walls, gaining speed and altitude. Clear of the LZ, clear of immediate danger. Nomad broke her orbit and turned east toward Bagram. The flight back was a study in fuel management and prayer. She climbed to altitude where the thinner air meant lower fuel consumption, throttled back to maximum endurance settings, and calculated the glide ratio if the engines quit. The A-10 could glide surprisingly well for something that looked like a bathtub with wings, but she'd prefer not to test that particular capability today. Bagram Approach Control gave her priority handling when she declared minimum fuel. The pattern cleared, the runway awaited, and she brought the A-10 down with the gentleness of someone handling their last egg. The landing was smooth, almost anticlimactic. The aircraft rolled out, turned onto the taxiway, and made it to the parking ramp before the engines flamed out from fuel starvation. She sat in the cockpit for a long moment after shutdown, hands still gripping the stick, adrenaline slowly draining from her system. Staff Sergeant Kowalski was waiting when she climbed down from the cockpit. He looked at the fuel gauge, then at her, then back at the gauge. "Ma'am, you landed with about 2 minutes of fuel remaining. 2 minutes is 2 minutes, that's not zero. That's not how we calculate safety margins." "I'm aware of what safety margins are, Sergeant. I'm also aware of what happens to SEALs when their air support leaves them hanging." He started to respond, then stopped. Instead, he began his post-flight inspection, documenting every scratch, every expended round, every Maverick rail now empty. Nomad headed for debrief, her flight suit soaked with sweat despite the morning cool. The debrief room held the usual cast: operations officer, intelligence weenie, a captain from legal who documented everything for the permanent record. They walked through the mission timeline: insertion support, contact, engagement sequence, fuel calculations, extract coverage. The intelligence officer was particularly interested in the second compound, the HVT's attempted escape. "Did you observe anything unusual about the compound structure or defensive preparations?" They were waiting for ground assault, prepared positions, overlapping fields of fire, stockpiled ammunition. Someone knew we were coming, or they were expecting trouble. Could be related to the intelligence we recovered. The SEAL team found documents suggesting a broader network than we anticipated. The debrief lasted 90 minutes. When they finally released her, Nomad walked out into midday sun that felt too bright, too clean for what the morning had held. She checked her watch. 7 hours until she could call her daughter. The satellite phone connection to her ex-husband's house in Colorado worked on a schedule as rigid as tactical planning, because her daughter's bedtime was sacred, and the 8.5-hour time difference meant narrow windows of contact. She headed to her quarters, a container housing unit that was technically climate-controlled and actually whatever temperature it felt like being. The walls were bare except for a photograph of her daughter, Emma, taken at her kindergarten graduation. Gap-toothed smile, holding a paper diploma like it was the Nobel Prize. That picture had been with Nomad through 3 deployments, 2 duty stations, and 1 very ugly divorce. It was talismanic, protective, a reminder of what mattered when everything else was noise. She lay down on the narrow bunk, closed her eyes, and tried to sleep. The GAU-8's BRRRT echoed in her memory, the smell of cordite and fear, Ironside's voice. That was danger fucking close, and perfect. Sleep came eventually, thin and unsatisfying. She dreamed of altitude and falling, of fuel gauges and empty sky. When she woke 3 hours later, her phone showed a message from the operations officer. "Ironside wants to meet you. 1800 hours DFAC." The dining facility. Neutral ground. She wondered what the SEAL commander wanted. Probably a professional thank you, the kind of courtesy that greased the wheels of inter-service cooperation. The dining facility at Bagram was what happened when military efficiency met institutional cafeteria aesthetics. Fluorescent lights, long tables, the smell of industrial-grade food that was nutritionally complete and culinarily questionable. Nomad arrived at 1800 precisely, scanning the crowd. Ironside sat alone at a corner table, still wearing his kit minus the weapons. He looked tired in the way that comes from sustained operations, not simple lack of sleep. His eyes tracked her approach, the automatic threat assessment of someone who'd spent too long in places where situational awareness meant survival. She grabbed a tray, loaded it with something that claimed to be meatloaf, and sat down across from him. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Ironside pushed a coffee cup across the table toward her. "Figured you'd need this after the morning you had." "I need about 15 of these, but I'll start with 1. She sipped. It was terrible, which meant it was military coffee, which meant it was perfect. "Your boy who got hit, how's he doing?" "Took a round through the shoulder, clean through and through, missed everything important. He'll be back in rotation in 6 weeks. Ironside paused. "We pulled some interesting intel from that compound. Turns out your second gun run disrupted what was supposed to be a coordinated ambush. They had 3 more technicals staged a click away, waiting to roll in once we were committed. You killed the commander before he could give the order. Lucky timing. Maybe, or maybe you read the terrain better than our intelligence shop did. He leaned back, studying her. You flew with the Montana Air Guard before active duty, 2 years, mostly training sorties and some wildfire suppression. Then you went active and deployed where? Iraq twice, Afghanistan 3 times. This is my 4th rotation here. And you've got a kid. It wasn't a question. He'd looked her up. That's what team leaders did before they trusted someone with their lives. They checked backgrounds, asked around, built a picture. Daughter, 7 years old, lives with her father in Colorado. That's got to be hard. Hard is relative. I get to do a job I'm good at. Emma's got stability, good schools, a father who actually shows up. We make it work. Ironside nodded slowly. I looked at your record. You've got 1,400 hours in the Hog, 300 combat. Your close air support ratings are all exemplary. Your commanders say you're reliable, precise, and unflappable. Is there a question coming, or are you just reading me my own resume? A slight smile creased his weathered face. Question is, why does a pilot with your stats, your experience, end up flying single-seat missions from a forward base while guys half as good are training new pilots stateside? The question landed in territory she usually avoided. You'd have to ask the assignment officers. Ironside's expression suggested he wasn't buying the deflection. He broke a piece of bread apart, methodical and patient. SEALs were good at patience. It was part of their particular skill set, the ability to wait in horrible conditions for the perfect moment. I did ask around, he said. Talked to some people who know people. Word is you had an incident 2 years ago. Afghanistan again, different valley, same kind of mission. Ground unit got ambushed, called for fires, and you delivered. Except the ground commander claimed you fired without proper authorization, that you endangered friendly forces. Nomad felt the old anger rise, controlled it. The ground commander was a captain who froze under fire. His men were dying while he tried to get approval from higher headquarters. I made the call. And they crucified you for it. They did an investigation, found that my actions were tactically sound but procedurally questionable. I got a letter of reprimand in my file. Not career-ending, but enough to make me radioactive for the good assignments. How many of that captain's men survived? All of them. 12 soldiers who went home to their families instead of going home in boxes. She met his eyes. I'd make the same call tomorrow. Ironside was quiet for a moment. Then, the men I brought home today, including the one who took a round through the shoulder, they're alive because you made similar calls. You stayed past fuel minimums. You took shots that were danger close. You trusted your training and your aircraft and your judgment. That's the job. No, Ironside said. That's beyond the job. That's the difference between a pilot who follows procedures and a pilot who understands that sometimes the procedure is wrong. He pulled something from his pocket, a patch, the SEAL trident embossed on it, worn from use. This belonged to a teammate I lost in Ramadi. He believed that competence and courage mattered more than rank or politics. I carried this through 40-some missions after he died. I want you to have it. Nomad looked at the patch, understanding the weight of what he was offering. In the military, such totems carried meaning beyond their physical form. They were trust made tangible. I can't take this. You already did, the moment you stayed overhead until we were safe. He stood, extending his hand. If I'm ever in the shit again, I want you overhead. That's the highest compliment one professional can give another. They shook. His grip was still firm, still testing, but different now. Not evaluation. Acknowledgement. After he left, Nomad sat alone with terrible coffee and a SEAL patch that smelled like cordite in history. The weight of it in her palm felt like the beginning of something she couldn't yet name. Around her, the dining facility continued its evening rhythm. Soldiers eating, talking, laughing, performing the small rituals that kept them human in inhuman places. Word traveled fast in military circles. By the next morning, the story of Nomad's close air support for Ironside's team had made the rounds. It acquired embellishments in the telling. The fuel state got lower, the gun runs got closer, the danger got more immediate. This was how legend started, though Nomad tried to deflect the attention. She had other missions to fly, other grunt units who needed their angel overhead. But something had shifted. When she walked into the operations center for her next brief, conversation didn't stop awkwardly. Pilots nodded. A Marine forward air controller she'd worked with before raised his coffee cup in salute. The operations officer handed her the day's tasking with something that might have been respect. "You're covering a resupply convoy up the Korangal. Should be routine, but intel says there's been increased chatter in that valley." Routine again. That word that promised nothing and meant less. She studied the route, noting the choke points, the places where the terrain favored ambush. The Korangal Valley had earned its nickname, the Valley of Death, through years of American blood. It was beautiful and unforgiving, a place where the mountains themselves seemed hostile. The mission brief was straightforward: orbit overhead while a convoy of supply trucks made the run from Camp Blessing to a remote firebase. The firebase was running low on ammunition and food, and the weather window for helicopter resupply had closed. So they were doing it the hard way, on roads that wound through terrain that gave every advantage to insurgents who knew every rock and turn. Nomad launched at dawn, the A-10 heavy with full weapons and fuel. She'd learned from yesterday's close call, topped off every tank, carried every round she could. The convoy appeared below 8 trucks, 4 gun trucks providing security, the whole package moving at the cautious speed of men who knew they were exposed. She checked in with the convoy commander, a gruff Army lieutenant who sounded like he'd been doing this route too many times. "Nomad, this is Dagger 6. Good to have you overhead. We're 20 minutes from the bad stretch." "Copy, Dagger 6. I'll be watching." The valley narrowed. The road began its serpentine climb through terrain that seemed designed by a malevolent god specifically for ambushes. Nomad tightened her orbit, eyes scanning every cave mouth, every cluster of rocks, every position that could hide men with RPGs. The attack came at the worst possible spot, a hairpin turn where the road was constrained by cliff walls on both sides, where the trucks had to slow to walking speed to navigate the corner. The lead gun truck erupted in smoke and fire as an RPG struck its engine block. The convoy shuddered to a halt, trapped between the disabled vehicle and the trucks behind. Then the small arms fire started, pouring down from elevated positions on both sides of the road. Dagger 6's voice came through, strained. "Contact, taking fire from multiple positions. We're pinned down." The ambush was textbook. The insurgents had chosen their ground perfectly, a kill zone where the convoy couldn't maneuver, couldn't retreat, couldn't do anything but take fire from elevated positions. Nomad could see muzzle flashes from a dozen locations, some on the south ridge, others north, all pouring fire into the trapped vehicles below. "Dagger 6, Nomad has visual on multiple hostiles. Need you to mark your forward position." "Can't mark. We're suppressed. Rounds are coming from everywhere." This was the nightmare scenario for close air support. Friendlies in contact, unable to mark positions. Enemy mixed in with terrain features that made visual identification challenging. The wrong gun run here would kill American soldiers. Nomad rolled into a low pass, purely for reconnaissance, not firing. She needed to see the geometry with her own eyes, build a mental map of who was where. Tracers arced up toward her, small arms fire, more optimistic than dangerous at her altitude. The convoy trucks were clustered near the disabled lead vehicle. She could see soldiers taking cover behind wheels, returning fire, but they were outnumbered and outgunned. The hostile positions became clear. A cluster of fighters on the south ridge, maybe 100 meters above the road, and a smaller group north, dug into natural fighting positions among the rocks. She climbed back to altitude, calculating angles of attack. The south ridge was the bigger threat, more fighters, better fields of fire. But approaching from the south meant overflying the convoy if she misjudged. If the rounds fell short, she'd hit Americans. Approaching from the north meant a more oblique angle but clearer separation between friendly and hostile positions. "Dagger 6, I'm engaging hostile positions on the south ridge. Keep your people behind hard cover." "Copy, make it quick. We've got wounded." She rolled inverted, pulled the nose down, lined up her approach from the north. The targeting reticle settled on the cluster of muzzle flashes. Range unwound. She fired a 3-second burst. The cannon rounds impacted like a line of explosions marching across the ridge. Rock and earth and human bodies disappeared in the storm of depleted uranium. The muzzle flashes stopped. The silence from that position was sudden and total. Dagger 6, South Ridge is suppressed. I'm swinging around for the north positions. She climbed and turned, building altitude for another run. But the insurgents on the North Ridge had watched what happened to their comrades. They were already running, abandoning their positions, scrambling up the mountainside in the particular sprint of men who'd seen the angel of death and wanted nothing more than distance. Nomad considered pursuit, decided against it. Her primary mission was protecting the convoy, not racking up kills. Let them run. Let them tell stories about the aircraft with the terrible cannon. Dagger 6 hostile positions appear to be abandoning. How copy? We copy, we're hold on. Gunfire erupted again from her radio. Different quality, closer, more desperate. Contact. Hostiles dismounting from a vehicle north side of the road, danger close to our position. Nomad's targeting pod snapped to the new threat. A pickup truck appeared on her screen, parked at a bend in the road just ahead of the convoy's position. Men were dismounting, carrying what looked like RPGs and automatic weapons. They'd been staged, waiting for exactly this moment when the convoy was stopped and vulnerable. This was a coordinated attack, better planned than the usual insurgent harassment. The fighters moved with purpose toward the convoy, using the terrain for cover, advancing in pairs. Professional, trained, probably foreign fighters, the kind who traveled to Afghanistan specifically to kill Americans. The geometry was terrible. The insurgents were maybe 50 meters from the lead convoy trucks, close enough that the GAU-8 would be weapons danger close. One miscalculation, one moment of incorrect compensation for wind or the A-10's velocity, and she'd kill the people she was trying to protect. Dagger 6, I've got eyes on your new problem. They're advancing on your north flank. Can you suppress them with organic weapons? Negative, we're still dealing with wounded from the first contact. We don't have the manpower to establish a defensive line. Nomad armed a Maverick missile. The AGM-65 had a smaller blast radius than the cannon, more precision, better for danger-close situations. She locked onto the pickup truck. If she could destroy their vehicle, she'd eliminate their escape route and possibly kill fighters still near it. Missile inbound, 3 seconds. Keep your people low. The Maverick flew true, tracking its laser designation, and struck the pickup in its bed. The explosion was larger than she'd expected. The truck must have been carrying ammunition or fuel. The fireball rose into the morning air, black smoke and orange flame, and the concussion knocked several nearby fighters off their feet. But not all of them. She could see survivors through her targeting pod, regrouping, continuing their advance. Maybe 6 or 7 fighters still combat effective. They were within hand grenade range of the convoy now. This was about to become a close-quarters massacre. Dagger 6, I'm making a show of force run. Tell your people to stay down and cover their ears. Copy, we're buttoned up. She descended fast, dropping to 500 feet above the road, dangerously low, well within range of small arms fire, low enough that the sound would be physically painful for anyone below. The A-10 roared over the convoy and the advancing fighters, engines screaming, the aircraft's shadow crossing them like a judgment. She saw fighters drop flat, covering their heads, the instinctive response to something massive and loud passing overhead. She pulled up hard, climbing away, and keyed her radio. Dagger 6, did that suppress them? They're staying down, but they haven't retreated. We're still in a bad spot. Nomad considered her options. She could make gun runs, but the proximity was too close. She could drop Mavericks, but her inventory was limited. Or she could do something that violated several regulations but might actually work. Dagger 6, I'm going to strafe the road 30 meters ahead of the hostile positions. The goal is to make them think they're about to die. It should encourage rapid reconsideration of their tactical choices. Translation, you're going to scare them. Aggressively encourage different life choices. The gun run was precision work at its finest, or most insane, depending on perspective. Nomad rolled into her approach from the east, where the terrain gave her a clear sight line down the road without overflying the convoy. Her targeting reticle settled on a patch of empty road 30 meters ahead of where the insurgents lay pinned by her previous pass. The mathematics were tight. At her current speed and descent angle, She needed to fire at exactly the right moment to walk rounds up to, but not beyond her target point. Fire too early, rounds fell short, possibly hitting the convoy. Fire too late, rounds went long and killed fighters who were technically trying to surrender by staying prone. Fire at the exact right moment, and she'd create a wall of high-explosive impacts that made it very clear what would happen if they moved. She fired a 1-second burst. 23 rounds of depleted uranium and high-explosive screamed downrange. The road ahead of the insurgents exploded in a linear pattern of destruction that looked like someone was hammering the earth with invisible fists. Asphalt vaporized. Rock shattered. The sound was cataclysmic, beyond loud, entering territory where noise became physical force. Through her targeting pod, she watched the insurgents scramble to their feet and sprint back the way they'd come. They left weapons behind. They left wounded behind. They ran with the desperate speed of men who just stared into the abyss and decided that dying for the cause was considerably less appealing than living to fight another day. Dagger 6, hostiles are retreating. Road ahead should be clear for your movement. Copy that, Nomad. That was the most beautiful and terrifying thing I've ever seen. We're moving now. The convoy began its cautious advance. The disabled lead gun truck was a loss. They'd have to recover it later with heavy equipment. But the crew was alive, piled into other vehicles, and the mission could continue. Nomad maintained her orbit, watching the convoy win through the remaining kilometers of dangerous road. The firebase came into view, a collection of hardened structures perched on a ridgeline, surrounded by HESCO barriers and concertina wire. The convoy rolled through its gates safe. Nomad, Dagger 6. My men are safe because of you. I don't have adequate words, but thank you. Do me a favor, Lieutenant. Tell your people I was happy to be their guardian angel today, and drive more carefully tomorrow. Will do. Dagger 6 out. She turned for home, fuel state comfortable, weapons largely expended, another mission logged in the book. The flight back to Bagram gave her time to think, to let the adrenaline drain away, to return from that hyper-focused state where only targeting solutions mattered. The A-10 droned through clear sky, reliable and ugly and perfect for its purpose. When she landed, the crew chief was waiting with his usual tablet and his assessment. Major, when you fire that close to friendlies, you're supposed to give me a heads up so I can update my will. Where's the fun in that, Kowalski? The operations officer caught her before she'd finished her post-flight paperwork. Major Voss, Colonel wants to see you. The colonel, meaning the wing commander, the senior officer responsible for all A-10 operations at Bagram. This could mean several things, none of them particularly good. Commanders didn't call pilots in for casual chats. They called you in when you distinguished yourself either positively or negatively, and the military being what it was, negative seemed more likely. Nomad walked to the headquarters building, still wearing her flight suit, still smelling of jet fuel and sweat. The colonel's office was what passed for comfortable in Afghanistan, a plywood structure with air conditioning that mostly worked in furniture that had probably been procured during the Soviet occupation. Colonel Sarah Reeves was a career A-10 pilot who'd flown in the first Gulf War and every conflict since. She looked up when Nomad entered, gestured to a chair. Sit. Nomad sat. Reeves studied her for a long moment. I've been getting interesting phone calls about you. A SEAL team leader who says you're the best close air support he's ever worked with. An Army convoy commander who claims you single-handedly broke an ambush that should have resulted in multiple KIA. And a very concerned maintenance officer who points out that you've been pushing aircraft and safety margins in ways that make him nervous. Ma'am, every decision I made was tactically sound. I'm not questioning your tactics, Major. I'm questioning your pattern of decisions that put you at risk. Reeves leaned back. You've got more combat hours than most of my pilots. Your close air support ratings are exemplary. Your aircraft handling is textbook. But you're also developing a reputation for taking risks that other pilots wouldn't take. With respect, ma'am, other pilots aren't presented with the same tactical situations. Or other pilots make different choices when those situations arise. Reeves pulled up a file on her computer. 2 years ago, you were reprimanded for engaging targets without proper authorization. The investigation concluded that your actions were tactically justified but procedurally wrong. Do you see where this is going? I see that I saved 12 soldiers who would have died otherwise. And I agree with that outcome. But the military runs on procedures for a reason. We can't have every pilot making individual calls about when rules apply. Reeves' expression softened slightly. I'm not trying to jam you up, Voss. I'm trying to keep you from jamming yourself up. There are people at higher headquarters who are watching your career. Some of them see a talented pilot who needs better guidance. Others see a cowboy who can't follow orders. What do you see, ma'am? I see someone who cares more about the mission and the people on the ground than her own career, which is admirable and also potentially career-ending. Reeves closed the file. I'm not giving you an order to stop being aggressive in your support of ground forces. I'm giving you guidance to be more aware of the political realities that exist alongside the tactical ones. The conversation with Colonel Reeves stayed with Nomad through the next week. She flew her missions: convoy escort, route reconnaissance, pre-planned close air support for infantry patrols. Each mission was executed with the same precision and aggression that had become her signature. But now she was conscious of the weight of observation, the knowledge that her decisions were being evaluated not just tactically but politically. It created a strange bifurcation in her thinking. In the cockpit, over the target area, with American lives depending on her judgment, that's when the only reality that mattered was ballistic and immediate. But afterward, in the debrief, in the paperwork, in the careful documentation of every weapon's release and every tactical decision, that's when she had to translate violence into bureaucratic language, justify split-second choices with regulation citations and doctrine references. The phone calls with her daughter became more precious. Emma was doing well in second grade, learning multiplication, playing soccer, building a life in Colorado that included a stepmother who was kind and a routine that provided stability. Nomad heard about spelling tests and playground drama, the small crises that loomed large in a 7-year-old's world. "Mommy, when are you coming home?" The question came every call, and Nomad had learned that honesty was better than false promises. "3 more months, baby girl. Then I get 2 weeks home and then I go back to my regular base in Nevada. Will you be there for my birthday?" "I'll be there, I promise." Promises were dangerous in military life. Deployments extended, missions changed. But this was one promise Nomad intended to keep, even if she had to walk from Afghanistan to Colorado. After the call ended, she sat in her quarters looking at Emma's picture. 7 years old, gap-toothed, holding a paper diploma. The picture had been with her through so much. Her phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. The message was brief. "This is Ironside. Your guardian angel services may be required again soon. We'll keep you informed." She stared at the message. SEAL teams didn't usually maintain communication with air support assets. They worked with whoever was assigned, adapted to different pilots and different aircraft. That Ironside had gone out of his way to contact her directly suggested something significant was developing. She typed back, "Standing by, let me know when and where." The response came immediately. "Bigger operation this time, multiple elements. Intel suggests it's the network you disrupted before. They're consolidating leadership. We're going to hit them when they're all together." "When?" "Being finalized. Maybe a week, maybe less. I wanted you to know because I'm requesting you specifically as our air support. Thought you should be prepared." Nomad set down her phone and considered what that meant. A bigger operation, multiple elements, high-value targets consolidating. This wasn't going to be a routine close air support mission. This was going to be one of those operations that either went perfectly or went catastrophically wrong. No middle ground. She checked her flight schedule. She had 3 more routine missions over the next 5 days, then a scheduled maintenance day. After that, she was available for special tasking. The operation brief came 3 days later. The room was crowded, SEALs from 2 teams, Army Rangers providing blocking forces, helicopter crews, intelligence analysts, and Nomad, the only fixed-wing air support invited to the planning session. That alone told her how seriously they were taking this. The intelligence officer laid out the situation. The network they'd been hitting had been in communication with a senior Taliban commander who was bringing together leadership from 3 provinces for a planning conference. The meeting would happen in a compound in the coast province, isolated, defensible, significant. It was an opportunity to decapitate the network in a single operation. Ironside took over the tactical brief. His team would insert via helicopter, conduct the assault, capture or kill the targets, and extract. The Rangers would establish blocking positions to prevent reinforcement or escape. The timeline was tight. From insertion to extract, they had maybe 45 minutes before hostile forces in the area could organize a response. Our primary concern, Ironside said, is what happens if this goes sideways. If we encounter heavier resistance than anticipated, if the compound is better fortified, if they've prepared defenses we haven't identified, we'll need immediate aggressive close air support. He looked directly at Nomad. That's where Major Voss comes in. She'll be overhead for the entire operation, full weapons load, pre-authorized to engage targets of opportunity. No need to request permission. She sees a threat to our teams, she eliminates it. This was unusual. Most close air support required clearance from ground commanders, confirmation that friendlies were clear, detailed coordination before weapons release. Pre-authorization meant trust, complete faith that the pilot would make the right call in the moment. It also meant responsibility. If she made a mistake, if she hit friendlies, the fault would be entirely hers. No ambiguity, no shared blame. The intelligence officer continued with terrain analysis, showing satellite imagery, discussing approaches and exfil routes. Nomad studied the compound's location, noting the surrounding mountains, the limited avenues of approach, the way the terrain naturally funneled movement. It looked like a place chosen specifically because it was difficult to assault. The brief lasted 2 hours. When it concluded, Ironside approached. Questions. Just one. What's your confidence level in the intelligence? 70%. Maybe 80. The source is good but not perfect. There's always the possibility this is a trap, that they know we're coming. And you're doing it anyway. Intelligence this good doesn't come along often. If there's even a 50% chance we can take out this much leadership in one operation, we have to try. That's the calculus. Nomad nodded. She understood that particular mathematics. War was about taking calculated risks where the potential payoff justified the danger. When? 48 hours. Night operation. We go in at 200 during their sleep cycle. You'll launch at 1:30, be overhead before we insert. I'll be ready. They shook hands. His grip was familiar now, the clasp of professionals who'd come to trust each other through shared danger. The 48 hours before the operation stretched like elastic time. Nomad flew 2 routine missions, but her mind was already on the upcoming operation. She studied the terrain imagery until she could visualize it in 3 dimensions, memorized the coordinates of the compound, planned her orbit patterns for maximum coverage while minimizing vulnerability to ground fire. The night before, she slept poorly. Not from fear. She'd done this enough times that the fear had been processed, filed away, converted into heightened awareness, but from anticipation. This was going to be significant, the kind of mission that defined careers or ended them. At midnight she woke, showered, put on her flight suit with the deliberate care of ritual. She checked her personal items, wallet, dog tags, the seal patch Ironside had given her, Emma's picture tucked into a pocket. Each item was a talisman, a connection to identity beyond the military role. The operations building was subdued at 100. The crew working the night shift moved with the quiet efficiency of people doing important work while the world slept. Nomad collected her mission materials, checked the weather forecast, reviewed the radio frequencies one more time. Staff Sergeant Kowalski met her at the aircraft. He'd prepped the A-10 with extra attention to detail, full weapons load, every system checked twice, the aircraft as ready as human effort could make it. "She's perfect, ma'am. I triple-checked everything." "I know you did, thank you." She completed her pre-flight inspection in the darkness, using a flashlight to check control surfaces, weapons, landing gear. Everything was as it should be. The engine spooled up at 125. 5 minutes early, but she wanted to be overhead before the operation began, wanted to establish her orbit and be ready for whatever came. The A-10 lifted into darkness, climbing through a moonless night where the mountains were absence rather than presence. She navigated by instruments and memory, heading toward the operational area, checking in with the airborne command element that was coordinating the entire operation. Nomad 3-1, checking in on operational frequency. I'm 15 minutes from station. Roger, Nomad. Ironside's element is 10 minutes from insertion. Weather is clear, no reported threats at this time. She reached the operational area and began her orbit at 15,000 feet, high enough for safety, close enough to respond quickly. Below, the compound was dark. Through her targeting pod, she could see the heat signatures of buildings, the cooler signatures of surrounding terrain. It looked peaceful. It was about to become very much not peaceful. The radio crackled. All elements, this is command. Execute, execute, execute. The helicopters appeared on her radar, two Black Hawks flying low and fast, carrying Ironside's teams toward the compound. She watched them descend, flare, touch down. The SEAL teams flowed out like water, moving toward the compound with practiced precision. For 30 seconds, nothing happened. Then the world lit up with muzzle flashes. The ambush was immediate and overwhelming. The compound erupted with gunfire from multiple positions. Rooftops, windows, prepared fighting positions that hadn't been visible in satellite imagery. The SEAL teams took cover, returning fire, but they were caught in the open, exposed in the landing zone. This wasn't a Taliban planning meeting. It was a trap. Ironside's voice cut through the radio traffic, strained but controlled. All elements, heavy contact. Compound is fortified beyond intelligence estimates. We're taking effective fire from multiple. The transmission ended abruptly. Nomad's stomach dropped. Either Ironside's radio had been damaged or something worse had happened. The SEAL element was pinned, taking casualties, and their commander was off the net. Command, Nomad 3-1. I hold multiple hostile positions engaging friendly forces. Request permission to engage. Nomad, you are cleared hot. Engage all identified hostile positions. She rolled into her first attack run, targeting the rooftop positions. The GAU-8 spoke its terrible language, and the rooftop disappeared in explosions and dust. But more positions opened fire, muzzle flashes blooming like deadly flowers across the compound. This wasn't just fortified. This was a prepared defense in depth, layered positions with overlapping fields of fire. The SEALs were trapped in a kill zone. She made run after run. Each gun passed silencing positions, but new ones kept appearing. The compound was larger than the imagery suggested, with underground positions, reinforced structures, a defensive plan that suggested they'd known about the operation. As she climbed from her fourth gun run, a new voice came over the radio, one of Ironside's team members, breathless and urgent. Nomad, this is Ironside 2. Actual is down. We're pinned in the landing zone. We have multiple wounded and can't maneuver to the compound or back to the extract point. What's Ironside's status? Took an RPG near miss. He's alive but unconscious. We're combat ineffective until we can consolidate and establish casualty collection. The tactical situation was clear and terrible. The SEAL team was trapped, leaderless, taking fire, with wounded who couldn't be moved. The Rangers providing blocking positions were too far away to help immediately. The helicopters had pulled back after taking ground fire. Nomad was the only asset that could affect the situation in the next critical minutes. She looked at her weapons load, half her Mavericks expended, maybe 200 rounds remaining in the cannon, enough to keep fighting but not enough to win decisively. Then she saw it, a technical vehicle approaching on the road from the east. Then another. Then 3 more. Reinforcements, arriving exactly when the trapped SEALs were most vulnerable. Command, Nomad 3-1. I hold 5 technical vehicles approaching from the east. If they reach the compound, friendly forces will be overrun. Nomad, engage and destroy. She selected her remaining Mavericks, locked onto the lead vehicles and fired. The missiles streaked downward and 2 vehicles exploded, but the others scattered, taking cover in terrain where her targeting pod struggled to maintain lock. The surviving technicals disappeared into a wadi, a dry riverbed that provided natural concealment from aerial observation. Nomads circled, searching for thermal signatures, but the vehicles had gone cold, engines shut down, waiting. This was sophisticated tactical thinking, the kind that suggested training beyond typical insurgent capabilities. On the ground, the SEAL situation was deteriorating. Ironside 2's voice came through again, more strained. Nomad, we're taking effective fire from the compound and we've got movement in the wadi to our east. We're about to get flanked. The mathematics were brutal. If she focused on the compound, the technicals would emerge from the wadi and attack the SEALs from behind. If she focused on the wadi, the compound defenders would maneuver and overwhelm the pinned team. She couldn't be in both places. Command, Nomad 3-1. Request immediate support. Additional air assets, artillery, anything you can get here. Nomad, nearest air support is 20 minutes out. Artillery is unavailable, too close to the Pakistan border. You're all they have. 20 minutes. The SEAL team didn't have 20 minutes. They had maybe 5 before the tactical situation became irreversible. Nomad made a decision that would either be brilliant or court-martial material. Ironside 2, I need you to mark your position with IR strobes, then have your team lay down suppressive fire on the compound. Make them think you're preparing to assault. Are you serious? We can barely move our wounded. I need them looking at you, not at the sky. 30 seconds of fire. Can you do it? A pause. Yeah, we can do 30 seconds. Do it now. She watched through her targeting pod as the SEAL position erupted with gunfire. M4s, saws, everything they had, all firing toward the compound. The effect was immediate. The compound defenders responded, firing back, focused on the threat in front of them, which meant they weren't watching Nomad descend to 300 feet, low enough that the mountains were above her, low enough that every instinct screamed this was insane. She armed the GAU-8 and flew directly at the compound, not in a diving attack but level, straight, apocalyptic. The cannon fired for 6 seconds, over 400 rounds of depleted uranium and high explosive, a stream of destruction that carved through the compound like a blade. Buildings disintegrated. Fighting positions ceased to exist. The sound was beyond description, beyond loud, entering realm where physics became violence made manifest. She pulled up hard, climbing away, every muscle straining against the G-forces. Behind her, the compound was silent. No muzzle flashes, no movement, just smoke and ruin. Ironside 2, compound is suppressed. Move your wounded now. I'm going after the technicals. She didn't wait for acknowledgement. The vehicles in the wadi would have heard that gun run, would know their ambush had failed. They'd either retreat or try one desperate assault. She needed to find them before they decided. Her fuel state was amber. Her ammunition was nearly exhausted, but the mission wasn't finished. The technicals emerged from the wadi exactly as Nomad had predicted, not retreating but advancing in a desperate assault toward the SEAL position. They'd seen the compound fall silent and knew their window of opportunity was closing. 3 vehicles, moving fast across open ground, men in the beds manning machine guns. It was either courage or fatalism, and from 1,500 feet, they looked the same. Nomad lined up her approach, calculated her remaining ammunition, maybe 90 rounds in the GAU-8. 3 vehicles, 30 rounds each if she was perfectly efficient. No margin for error, no second chances. The first vehicle died under a 2-second burst. The truck disintegrated, rolled, burned. The second technical tried to evade, swerving wildly, but the A-10 wasn't something you dodged. Another burst, shorter, more precise. The technical shuddered and stopped. The third vehicle's driver made the smart choice. He stopped and the occupants bilayed out, running for whatever cover they could find. Nomad considered pursuit, decided against it. Fighters on foot without heavy weapons weren't an immediate threat. The SEALs were consolidating, moving wounded toward the extract point. The immediate crisis had passed. Command, Nomad 3-1. Hostile vehicles destroyed. Compound is suppressed. Friendly forces are mobile. Copy, Nomad. Extract birds are inbound. What's your fuel state? She checked. The gauge was red but not critical, maybe 25 minutes remaining. I'm good for one more orbit, then I need to head home. Roger, stay overhead until extract is complete. The next 15 minutes felt longer than the entire battle. She watched the SEAL team reach the extract point, watched them load wounded onto the helicopters with practiced efficiency. Ironside was among the casualties being loaded, still unconscious. The medical crew worked on him even as the helicopter lifted off. When the last bird departed, carrying the last SEAL out of the valley, Nomad felt something release in her chest. They were safe. Battered, wounded, but safe. Command, all friendly forces extracted. Nomad is Winchester on station time, returning to base. Copy Nomad 3-1, well done. The flight back to Bagram was strange. The adrenaline was draining away, leaving exhaustion in its wake. Her hands trembled on the controls. Her vision seemed simultaneously sharp and distant. This was the crash that came after sustained crisis, the moment when the body remembered it was supposed to be human. She landed with 5 minutes of fuel remaining. Not the emergency of her first mission with Ironside, but close enough that Kowalski gave her a look that suggested they'd be having words later. The debrief was extensive. Operations officer, intelligence, the full complement of personnel who needed to understand what had happened. Nomad walked them through it, the ambush, the tactical decisions, the gun runs, the fuel management. She spoke in the flat, professional tone that military after-action reports required, converting violence into bureaucratic language. When she finished, the operations officer leaned back. You're aware that flying at 300 feet through a mountain valley violates several safety regulations. I'm aware, and you did it anyway. The alternative was watching SEALs die. The aftermath of the mission rippled through Bagram like a stone in water. By the next morning, everyone knew the outline. The SEAL operation that had been ambushed, the A-10 pilot who'd flown dangerously low to break the ambush, the successful extract despite heavy casualties. The details were classified, but rumors filled the gaps with varying degrees of accuracy. Nomad tried to maintain her normal routine. She went to the gym, did her laundry, called her daughter at the appointed time. Emma talked about a field trip to a pumpkin patch, about making jack-o'-lanterns in art class. The mundane details felt surreal after the previous night's violence. Colonel Reeves summoned her again. This time, the colonel's expression was unreadable. Major Voss, I've received preliminary reports from last night's operation. Tell me in your professional assessment, was flying at 300 feet through that valley necessary? Nomad met her eyes. Yes, ma'am. At our normal attack altitude, the compound defenders had cover and concealment. To be effective, I needed to eliminate their covered positions entirely. That required a level gun run at minimum safe altitude. Minimum safe altitude is generally considered to be 500 feet. Under peacetime training conditions, yes ma'am. Under combat conditions where American lives are immediately threatened, minimum safe altitude is whatever keeps you flying and accomplishes the mission. Reeves was quiet for a moment. The SEAL team leader, Lieutenant Commander Williams, Coulson Ironside, he suffered a traumatic brain injury from an RPG concussion. He's being evacuated to Landstuhl for treatment. Before he lost consciousness, he filed a field commendation recommending you for the Distinguished Flying Cross. The Distinguished Flying Cross, the decoration given for heroism or extraordinary achievement during aerial flight. It was significant, prestigious, the kind of medal that marked careers. His second-in-command has filed supporting documentation. The Ranger Battalion commander has added his recommendation. The operation commander has endorsed it. I'm adding my recommendation as your wing commander. Reeves pulled up a document on her screen. But here's what concerns me. Your official statement includes the phrase, minimum safe altitude is whatever keeps you flying and accomplishes the mission. That's not doctrine. That's not procedure. That's personal philosophy, and while I understand the sentiment, it's the kind of philosophy that gets pilots killed. With respect, ma'am, it's the kind of philosophy that keeps soldiers alive. This time. What about next time? What about the mission where the valley is narrower, or the gun run requires an even lower altitude, or the tactical situation demands something that crosses the line from heroic to suicidal? Reeves closed the file. I'm approving the recommendation for the DFC. You earned it. But I'm also putting you on notice that you're being watched by people who think you're either the best close air support pilot in theater or a risk-taker who's going to get herself killed. And I haven't decided which assessment I agree with. The Distinguished Flying Cross recommendation moved through channels with the peculiar pace of military bureaucracy, simultaneously urgent and glacial. While staff officers reviewed statements and documentation, Nomad returned to flying routine missions. Convoy escort, route reconnaissance, presence patrols where she orbited over forward operating bases simply to remind everyone that American air power was available and responsive. But something had changed. Ground commanders requested her specifically for missions. When she checked in on tactical frequencies, voices carried a note of relief. The radio chatter included her call sign with a reverence usually reserved for legendary aircraft or mythical warriors. Nomad's overhead became shorthand for "we're going to be okay." She tried to deflect the attention, but in a deployed environment where morale was built on small victories and reputation mattered, she'd become something larger than herself. The guardian angel, the pilot who flew too low and hit too close and never, ever left soldiers behind. 3 weeks after the ambush mission, she received word that Ironside had been released from the medical facility in Germany. His traumatic brain injury had been serious but not permanently debilitating. He'd be heading back to the States for continued recovery, then likely medical retirement. The career that had made him a SEAL was over. She sent a message to his military email: "Heard you're recovering, glad you're alive, take care of yourself." His response came the next day: "Alive because of you. The team is alive because of you. I'm putting together a package, statements from every operator who was on that mission. They'll tell you what I can't adequately express. You didn't just save our lives. You showed us what it means to be a professional warrior. Thank you." She read the message 3 times, then saved it in a folder she titled "Why We Do This." The folder contained letters from soldiers she'd supported, commendations from commanders, and Emma's drawing of an airplane with "My Mommy" written in crayon. The things that mattered when the rest was noise. Her deployment was entering its final phase. 2 more weeks, then the long journey home. Bagram to Manas, Manas to Germany, Germany to the States. The end was close enough to taste, to anticipate. She'd be home for Emma's birthday. She'd keep that promise. The phone call from operations came at 2100, interrupting her evening routine. "Major Voss, we've got a situation developing. Ground unit is in contact, requesting immediate air support. You're the closest available asset." She was dressed and heading to the flight line before the operations officer finished briefing her. This was the rhythm now, ingrained through repetition. The transition from human to pilot to weapon system happened without conscious thought. The A-10 was already being prepped by Kowalski, who'd heard the call and anticipated the need. He helped her through pre-flight checks with practiced efficiency. "Where we going tonight, ma'am?" "Paktika province. Infantry unit got into more than they expected." "Then they'll be glad you're coming." She launched into darkness, climbing through a sky so clear the stars looked close enough to touch. The infantry unit in contact was a platoon from the 101st Airborne, conducting a presence patrol in an area that intelligence had assessed as low threat. Intelligence had been wrong. They'd stumbled into a staging area for a much larger insurgent force and were now outnumbered, taking effective fire from multiple directions, trying to withdraw to defensible terrain. The platoon leader, a lieutenant with the call sign Sabre 6, sounded young and scared and trying hard not to show either. "Nomad Sabre 6, we're taking effective fire from our north and east. We've got 1 urgent casualty and 2 routine. We're trying to bound back to a ridgeline that'll give us better defensive positions." "Copy, Sabre 6, I'm 3 minutes out. Can you mark your position?" "Marking with IR strobe now." The strobe appeared on her targeting pod, a bright flashing signature that separated friendly from hostile. The hostile positions were less distinct, muzzle flashes in the darkness, scattered across several hundred meters of rough terrain. This wasn't a prepared ambush like the SEAL mission. This was a meeting engagement, 2 forces stumbling into each other, both trying to establish tactical advantage. "Sabre 6, I hold your position. I'm going to make a show of force run first. If that doesn't persuade them to reconsider their life choices, I'll escalate to weapons. Copy. We'd appreciate anything that makes them less enthusiastic about shooting at us. Nomad descended to 1,000 feet and made a low pass over the hostile positions. The sound of the A-10's engines in the mountain terrain was distinctive, a roar that announced exactly what was overhead and what it was capable of doing. The effect was immediate. The muzzle flashes stopped. The platoon leader's voice came through with audible relief. Nomad, that did it. They're breaking contact. We're continuing our movement to the ridgeline. Roger, I'll stay overhead until you're secure. She reestablished her orbit, watching the infantry platoon move tactically across the terrain. They were good bounding overwatch, covering each other, moving wounded with care. The kind of small unit tactics that came from good training and competent leadership. When they reached the ridgeline and established defensive positions, Sabre 6 called again. Nomad, Sabre 6, we're secure. Medevac is inbound for our casualties. Thank you for the save. No save needed, Sabre. You handled it well. Maybe. But having you overhead made the difference between tactical withdrawal and desperation retreat. The men know the sound of the hog. When they heard you, they knew they'd be okay. After the medevac collected the wounded and the platoon settled into defensive positions for the night, Nomad headed back to Bagram. The mission had been routine by combat standards. No weapons fired, no dramatic gun runs, just presence and the threat of violence kept ready. But it was these missions, the quiet ones, that accumulated into trust. Ground forces learned that when Nomad was overhead, they weren't alone. That certainty, that confidence, changed how soldiers fought. It gave them options they wouldn't otherwise have. The final days of the deployment blurred together. More missions, more hours in the cockpit, more incremental contributions to a war that seemed to have no definable end. Nomad flew her last combat mission on a clear morning in late October. It was a routine patrol, orbiting over a sector that was expected to be quiet. Nothing happened. She landed, completed her paperwork, and felt the strange emptiness that came with finishing something significant. Staff Sergeant Kowalski met her with a bottle wrapped in a paper bag. Tradition says the last mission gets a toast. This is non-alcoholic apple cider because technically we're in a combat zone, but the sentiment holds. They stood by the A-10, drinking cider from paper cups, looking at an aircraft that had carried her through 4 deployments and countless missions. The airframe was scratched and patched, the paint worn in places, but it was reliable. Ugly and reliable and perfect. "You're heading home tomorrow?" Kowalski asked. "Tomorrow, 20 hours of travel to get back to Emma. She's lucky to have you. I'm lucky to have her." The departure from Bagram was bittersweet. She'd spent 6 months in this place, built relationships, flown missions that mattered. But she was ready to go home, to trade flight suits for civilian clothes, to be a mother instead of a warrior. The journey home was exactly as tedious as the journey out. Cargo planes and commercial charters, waiting in terminals, time zones crossed until her body had no idea what time it was. She arrived at Nellis Air Force Base in Nevada on a Saturday afternoon. Her squadron commander met her with handshakes and welcome home platitudes. The formal part of returning. What she wanted was the informal part, seeing Emma. Her ex-husband had agreed to bring Emma to Nevada for the reunion. They met in the parking lot of her apartment. Emma came running, gap-toothed, smile wider than before, hair longer, 7 years old and growing faster than Nomad could track from Afghanistan. "Mommy!" The hug was everything. The weight of her daughter in her arms, the smell of kids' shampoo and innocence, the reminder that this was what she protected. Not policies or borders or abstractions, but specific humans who deserved to grow up without fear. Her ex-husband Marcus stood back, giving them space. When Emma finally released her grip, he stepped forward with a handshake that was civil but not warm. Their marriage had ended badly, but they'd learned to co-parent with professional courtesy. "She's been counting days," Marcus said. "Welcome home. Thanks for bringing her. Of course, she's staying the week with you, then I'll pick her up Sunday." The week with Emma was sacred time. They went to parks, made elaborate pancake breakfasts, watched movies on the couch. Nomad learned about her daughter's friends, her interests, the small dramas of second grade. She avoided talking about Afghanistan. Emma asked once, "Did you fly your plane?" And Nomad said yes, and that was enough. Children didn't need the details. The week ended too quickly. Marcus collected Emma on Sunday evening, and Nomad was alone in her apartment with silence and memories. She tried to decompress, to shift from deployment mindset to garrison life, but the transition was harder than she expected. Garrison life had its own rhythms. She returned to her duties as an instructor pilot at Nellie's, teaching younger pilots how to fly the A-10, how to deliver close air support, how to make the split-second decisions that separated competence from catastrophe. She was good at teaching, patient and precise, but part of her mind remained in Afghanistan's valleys. The paperwork for the Distinguished Flying Cross moved through its final stages. She was notified that the award ceremony would happen in December, a formal event with the wing commander presiding. She tried not to think about it too much. Medals were nice, but they weren't why she flew. 3 weeks after returning home, she received a package with no return address. Inside was a photo, Ironside SEAL team, taken before the mission that had ended with ambush and evacuation. 6 men in full kit, faces serious, weapons ready. On the back, each man had signed his name and added a brief message. "You saved my life, thank you. The guardian angel, we won't forget. Fly safe, we need more pilots like you." At the bottom, in different handwriting, Ironside had written, "You exemplify everything we ask of warriors. Take care of yourself. The fight needs you." She put the photo on her desk next to Emma's drawing of an airplane. Past and present, violence and innocence, the contradictions that defined her life. The Distinguished Flying Cross ceremony happened on a cold December morning. The hangar was full, her squadron, the wing staff, some of the pilots she'd trained. Her parents had flown in from Montana. Emma was there, dressed up, not entirely understanding what was happening but knowing it was important. The wing commander read the citation, "For heroism and extraordinary achievement while participating in aerial flight." The words documented the mission, the tactical situation, the decisions that had kept SEALs alive. But the words couldn't capture the weight of those moments, the geometry of violence, the burden of responsibility. When the commander pinned the medal to her uniform, Emma clapped enthusiastically. That was the moment that mattered, not the medal itself, but her daughter seeing that competence and courage had value, that serving something larger than yourself was worth the cost. After the ceremony, during the reception, a young captain approached. She was new to the squadron, recently qualified in the A-10, eager and uncertain in the way of all new pilots. "Major Voss, I just wanted to say, your reputation is why I requested this squadron. I want to learn to fly the way you do." Nomad looked at this young officer, seeing herself a decade ago, and felt the weight of legacy. "Then let me give you the most important lesson. The aircraft and the weapons are tools. What matters is the judgment about when and how to use them. Always ask yourself, will this decision serve the people depending on me? If the answer is yes, execute without hesitation. If the answer is anything else, pause and reconsider." The months after the medal ceremony settled into routine. Nomad flew training missions, taught young pilots, attended the endless meetings that filled garrison life. She had Emma every other weekend, building small traditions, Saturday pancakes, Sunday hikes in the desert, bedtime stories that increasingly featured strong female characters doing extraordinary things. The routine was comfortable, but part of her missed the clarity of combat. There was something pure about flying over Afghanistan, where the mission was unambiguous and the measure of success was immediate. Garrison flying was important, training the next generation, maintaining proficiency, serving her time, but it lacked the edge that made her feel most alive. Spring brought new developments. She was promoted to lieutenant colonel, which meant more administrative responsibilities and less cockpit time. She accepted the promotion with mixed feelings. Higher rank meant greater influence, the ability to shape how the next generation of pilots thought about close air support. But it also meant distance from the work that defined her identity. Then, in late April, she received an email that changed the trajectory of her career. It was from the commander of the A-10 weapons school at Nellie's. the advanced training program that produced the Air Force's most skilled close air support pilots. Lieutenant Colonel Voss, I'm writing to gauge your interest in becoming a weapons school instructor. Your combat experience, teaching ability, and demonstrated judgment make you an ideal candidate for this position. The assignment would be 3 years, working with the most motivated students in the A-10 community. If you're interested, we should discuss. The weapons school. It was the pinnacle of the A-10 community, where the best pilots learned to be better, where doctrine was written and tactics were refined. Being selected as an instructor was an honor that few received. It was also consuming work, long hours, high expectations, the pressure of training pilots who would themselves become leaders and instructors. Nomad called her ex-husband that evening. "Marcus, I need to discuss something about my career." His tone was wary. Their relationship was functional but not warm, built on shared responsibility for Emma rather than any remaining affection. "What's up? I've been offered a position at the weapons school. It would mean staying at Nellie's for 3 more years, which means stability for Emma, same school, same house, same routine. But it would also mean long hours and intense work periods. What do you want to do?" "I want to say yes. The work matters. Training the next generation of close air support pilots, that's how I can have the biggest impact." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "Then say yes. Emma's doing well here. She's got friends, she's thriving in school, the stability is good for her, and honestly knowing you're satisfied with your work makes you a better parent when you do have time with her." "You sure?" "I'm sure. Take the job." She accepted the position the next morning. The weapons school assignment began in June. The work was everything she'd expected: intellectually demanding, tactically challenging, rewarding in ways that regular squadron life wasn't. The weapons school operated on a different level than standard Air Force training. The students weren't beginners learning basics. They were experienced pilots selected for potential, coming to learn the art of employing the A-10 in the most demanding scenarios. Nomad's role was to take their skills and refine them until competence became expertise. Her first class included 8 pilots, each with multiple deployments, each thinking they knew how to fly the A-10. By the end of the first week, she dismantled those assumptions and begun rebuilding their understanding from first principles. She taught them that precision wasn't just about hitting targets. It was about choosing the right weapon at the right moment, understanding second and third-order effects, managing the geometry of violence so that friendly forces were protected and hostile forces were neutralized. The classroom work was detailed: weapons effects, terminal ballistics, radio procedures, rules of engagement, targeting priorities. But the real learning happened in the air, during training missions that replicated combat scenarios with unforgiving realism. One training mission in particular tested a student named Captain Rodriguez, a competent pilot who'd done 2 Afghanistan rotations but struggled with decision-making under pressure. Nomad set up a scenario: friendly forces in contact, multiple hostile positions, constrained terrain. Rodriguez had to make real-time decisions about approach angles, weapon selection, risk management. He froze, not physically but mentally. The cognitive load overwhelmed him, and instead of making a decision, even a wrong one, he asked for guidance. Nomad let the scenario play out, watched him fail, then debriefed with the brutal honesty that weapons school demanded. "Captain, when you asked for guidance from ground forces, what were you actually doing?" Rodriguez, to his credit, knew the answer. "I was abdicating responsibility, pushing the decision to someone else because I wasn't confident." And what happens in combat when you're the only air asset available and the ground commander doesn't have the tactical knowledge to tell you what to do? People die. "People die," Nomad confirmed. "Your job is to be the expert. To take the information available, process it faster than seems possible, and execute." Confidence comes from repetition, from making hundreds of decisions in training until the process becomes instinct. They flew the scenario again. This time Rodriguez made decisions, not all perfect but decisive. He engaged targets, managed his fuel, communicated clearly. He passed. Over the months, Nomad saw her students transform. They arrived thinking they were good pilots. They left knowing they were expert tacticians, capable of operating in the most demanding environments. Several of them would deploy again, would find themselves in situations where the training made the difference. That was the reward, not medals or recognition, but the knowledge that somewhere, in some valley in Afghanistan or Iraq or wherever America's wars took them, a pilot she'd trained would make the right call because she taught them how. Emma grew. 7 became 8, then 9. The years in Nevada gave her stability that military children rarely experienced. Same school for 3 years, same friends, consistent routines. She thrived academically, played soccer with enthusiasm that exceeded skill, and developed into a thoughtful child who asked complex questions about justice and fairness. One evening, working on homework at Nomad's kitchen table, Emma looked up with the serious expression she wore when processing difficult concepts. "Mom, why do you fly the plane that shoots bad guys?" It was the first time she'd asked directly. Nomad set down the dish she was washing, sat down across from her daughter. "Because there are good people, soldiers, Marines, people who are trying to help others, who sometimes need protection. My job is to make sure they come home safely. But you shoot people. You kill them." There was no judgment in Emma's voice, just the factual observation of a 9-year-old trying to understand her mother's profession. "Yes," Nomad said, "because lying to children about violence didn't prepare them for a world where violence existed. I do, and that's a serious responsibility. I don't take it lightly." "Does it bother you?" "Sometimes. Late at night when I'm trying to sleep, I think about the people who didn't go home because of decisions I made. But I also think about the American soldiers who did go home because of those same decisions. It's complicated, Emma. There aren't easy answers." Emma considered this with the gravity of someone much older. "I think it's sad that anybody has to die. I agree, war is sad, but until the world changes there are people who need protection, and I'm good at providing it." Her daughter nodded, returned to her homework. The conversation was over, but Nomad knew it wouldn't be the last time they'd discuss it. As Emma got older, the questions would get harder, more philosophical. That was appropriate. Children should question, should push back against the normalization of violence. It kept adults honest. The weapons school assignment continued through its second year. Nomad had trained 16 pilots, written 3 tactical papers on close air support employment, and participated in several exercises that tested joint operations between Air Force, Army, and Marine assets. Her reputation grew beyond the A-10 community. She was invited to speak at the Air Force Weapons School Commandant's breakfast, at joint conferences, at professional military education courses. Each speaking engagement was an opportunity to shape how the next generation thought about air power, about the ethical employment of violence, about the responsibility that came with capability. In these forums, she emphasized judgment over firepower, restraint over aggression, the importance of understanding that every weapon's release had human consequences. Some officers found her perspective challenging. The Air Force culture emphasized technology and precision, the ability to strike targets with minimal collateral damage. Nomad agreed with those goals but pushed back against the tendency to treat warfare as antiseptic. "Precision weapons don't make war clean," she told a room full of majors attending advanced training. "They make war more accurate, but accuracy in service of what? If we lose sight of the human element, if we forget that we're protecting people, not just servicing targets, we become technicians instead of warriors. And warriors understand that violence is never the first choice, but when it becomes necessary, it must be executed with competence and moral clarity." The third year of her weapons school assignment brought unexpected news. Colonel Reeves, her former wing commander from Afghanistan, was now a brigadier general working at Air Combat Command. She called Nomad directly, bypassing normal channels. "Kestrel," she said, using Nomad's first name in the informal way that senior officers sometimes employed with subordinates they respected, "I've got a proposition for you. How would you feel about command?" Command. In the Air Force, command was the golden path, leading a squadron, being responsible not just for your own performance but for the performance and welfare of hundreds of airmen. It was career-defining, demanding, and the ultimate expression of trust that the service placed in an officer. What kind of command? Nomad asked. The 442nd Fighter Wing at Whiteman. They're transitioning some of their A-10s to the reserve component. You'd be the squadron commander, responsible for maintaining readiness, training pilots, and being prepared to deploy on short notice. 2-year assignment, then likely a staff job at the Pentagon. The Pentagon. The thought made her stomach tight. She was a pilot, not a staff officer. The idea of spending her days in meetings and PowerPoint briefings was antithetical to everything she valued. But command, that was different. That was operational leadership. What about Emma? Whiteman is in Missouri. That would mean moving her away from the stability she's had here. That's a decision only you can make, Reeves said. But Kestrel, you're one of the best close air support pilots I've ever seen. The service needs you in positions where you can shape culture and develop the next generation. Command is how you do that at scale. Nomad thanked her for the call, promised to think about it, and spent the next week wrestling with the decision. The conversation with Marcus was difficult. Another move. You've been at Nellie's for 4 years. Emma's established here. She's got friends, she's doing well in school. You want to uproot her for a 2-year assignment. I don't want to uproot her, but this is command. It's the opportunity to lead, to influence how the Air Force thinks about close air support at the operational level. Marcus sighed. Look, I get that your career is important, but Emma needs stability more than the Air Force needs you in command. Can't you turn it down? I could, but then what? I spend the rest of my career teaching at the weapons school. That's valuable work, but it's not leadership. And being Emma's mother isn't leadership. The question landed hard. Marcus continued, his tone softer but no less serious. You're a great pilot. You're a hero if we're being honest, but you're also a mother. And at some point you have to decide which identity matters more. The conversation ended without resolution. Nomad talked to Emma, explained the opportunity, asked for her input. Emma, now 10 years old and more aware of complexities than any child should have to be, said simply, "If it's important to you, Mom, I can handle it, but I wish you could stay here." The decision kept her awake for weeks. She'd lie in bed running calculations, trying to optimize for variables that couldn't be quantified. Emma's well-being versus career advancement, stability versus opportunity, the mother she was versus the officer she might become. In the end, she called General Reeves and declined the command opportunity. The conversation was brief, professional. "I appreciate the offer, ma'am, but my daughter needs stability more than the Air Force needs me in command. I'm requesting to remain at Nellie's for the foreseeable future." There was a long pause. Then Reeves said, "I respect that decision. Not everyone makes it, but it's the right one for you. The Air Force will be fine. Make sure your family is too." The relief was immediate and profound. She'd made the choice, accepted the trade-off, prioritized the human connection that mattered most. There would be no command, no Pentagon staff job, no general officer career path. But Emma would have continuity, and Nomad would have the peace that came from knowing she'd chosen the harder right over the easier wrong. She stayed at the weapons school, continued training pilots, continued refining the art of close air support. The work remained meaningful even without the trajectory toward higher rank. Years passed. Emma moved through middle school, growing into a thoughtful teenager who'd inherited her mother's intensity and her father's steady pragmatism. The military conflicts that had defined Nomad's career wound down, transitioned, evolved into different kinds of operations in different places. The A-10 remained relevant, its close air support mission enduring even as newer aircraft entered the inventory. Nomad trained pilots who deployed to Syria, to Iraq again, to places where American forces found themselves in complex tactical situations that required the kind of low-altitude, high-precision work the A-10 specialized in. When Emma turned 16, she asked to visit Nellie's, to see her mother's workplace beyond the brief glimpses she'd gotten at ceremonies and open houses. Nomad arranged it, a day walking through the squadron, meeting pilots, sitting in an A-10 cockpit. Emma was quiet, observant, taking everything in with the careful attention she gave to subjects that interested her. At the end of the day, standing on the flight line watching A-10s taxi past, Emma said, "I think I understand now why you do this. Yeah, it's not about the flying, it's about the responsibility, the people depending on you, you're good at it and that matters." Nomad felt something release in her chest, validation from the person whose opinion mattered most. That's exactly it. I'm proud of you, Mom. Even when I wished you were around more, even when I didn't understand why you kept choosing this, I'm proud. They stood together in the Nevada sun, mother and daughter, watching aircraft that carried the weight of American air power and the burden of American wars. The moment was simple, profound, the kind of connection that transcended career choices and deployment cycles. That evening, back at the apartment, Emma asked the question Nomad had been expecting. Do you regret not taking command, not going further in your career? Nomad considered the question while making dinner, pasta with marinara, Emma's favorite, the kind of simple meal that represented normalcy. She'd learned over the years that the most important conversations happened during routine moments, not formal sit-downs. I regret that I had to choose, she said finally. In an ideal world, I could have been both the officer pursuing command and the mother providing stability. But we don't live in that world. We live in this one where choices have consequences. But do you regret the choice you made? No, the answer came without hesitation. You needed me here more than the Air Force needed me in command. That math was clear. Emma stirred sauce, thoughtful. What if I hadn't needed you? What if Dad had remarried sooner or I'd been okay with moving? Then I probably would have taken command. But you did need me, and that made the decision straightforward. Being your mother isn't secondary to being an officer, it's primary. Is that hard for you? Knowing you could have done more in your career, Nomad turned off the stove, faced her daughter directly. Emma, I flew combat missions that saved lives. I trained pilots who went on to save more lives. I helped develop tactics that made close air support more effective and safer for ground forces. That's a career. Maybe it's not the career that leads to general officer rank, but it's the one that lets me sleep at night knowing I did work that mattered. And being my mom matters. Being your mom matters most. They ate dinner, talked about Emma's plans for college. She was considering aerospace engineering, drawn to aviation but not military service, and watched a movie before bed. The conversation wasn't dramatic, but it represented something important: the reconciliation of competing identities, the acceptance of trade-offs, the understanding that success could be measured in relationships as much as rank. The years continued their march. Nomad remained at Nellie's, became the senior instructor pilot at the weapons school, acquired the kind of institutional knowledge that made her invaluable for training, but limited her prospects for further promotion. She made peace with that trajectory. The Air Force, in its infinite bureaucratic wisdom, recognized her value and let her stay where she was effective rather than forcing her into staff positions where she'd be miserable. Emma graduated high school, enrolled at MIT to study aerospace engineering. The circle was completing, daughter following mother into aviation, though on a different path. Nomad helped her move into the dormitory, met her roommate, gave awkward parental advice about studying and making friends and calling home regularly. On the drive back to Nevada, alone for the first time in 18 years of parenthood, Nomad felt the strange emptiness of transition. The daily responsibility of raising a child had ended, replaced by the long-distance relationship of parent and adult offspring. It was appropriate, healthy, the natural progression. It was also lonely. She threw herself into work, trained more pilots, wrote another tactical paper on weapons employment in complex terrain. One morning in late October, now a full 20 years after her first deployment to Afghanistan, Nomad received an email that seemed to come from another lifetime. The subject line read, "Reunion Ironsides Team." The message was from one of the SEAL operators she'd supported during that mission 2 decades ago. He was organizing a reunion, gathering the team members who'd survived, honoring those who hadn't. He wanted Nomad to attend. "You were part of the team that night," the message read. "You should be there when we remember it." The reunion was scheduled for San Diego in 3 weeks. Nomad requested leave, booked a flight, and found herself simultaneously looking forward to and dreading the event. These men had moved on with their lives, retired from service, built careers, raised families. She wondered what they'd become, how they'd processed the violence they'd experienced. The reunion took place at a hotel near Coronado, the symbolic heart of SEAL culture. When Nomad walked into the hospitality suite, she barely recognized the men. They'd aged as she had, the 20 years showing in gray hair and weathered faces. But the bearing remained, the particular way that warriors carried themselves, alert and capable even in civilian clothes. Ironside approached first. He was fully recovered from the traumatic brain injury, though he walked with a slight limp from subsequent injuries that had ended his career. He'd become a defense contractor, applying his tactical knowledge to training foreign militaries. "Nomad," he said, extending his hand. "You look exactly the same, must be all that time at altitude. You look distinguished, very civilian. I wear it like a disguise." They shook hands, then embraced briefly. The rest of the team gathered around, 5 of the original 6 operators, plus several from the larger SEAL community who'd worked with Ironside over his career. They spent the evening trading stories, remembering missions, honoring absent friends. The alcohol flowed, the laughter came easily, the camaraderie transcending the years. Late in the evening, Ironside called for attention. "I want to say something about that night. The night that ended my career but saved all our lives." The room quieted. These men had heard his stories before, but this felt different, more formal. "We walked into an ambush. Intelligence failed us, planning failed us, and we were seconds away from being overrun. Then Nomad, Lieutenant Colonel Voss, flew her A-10 at 300 feet through a mountain valley and broke that ambush with a gun run that violated about 17 safety regulations." He raised his glass. "She stayed overhead until we were extracted, burned fuel down to fumes, and never hesitated. That's not just competence. That's the warrior ethic in its purest form. I nominated her for the Distinguished Flying Cross, which she received, but I want her to know something else." Ironside pulled a small box from his pocket, opened it to reveal a SEAL Trident pin. "This is my Trident, the one I turned in when I medically retired. The service returned it to me as a keepsake. I want Nomad to have it." The room was silent. Nomad understood the significance. The SEAL Trident was sacred, earned through arguably the hardest military training in the world, worn with fierce pride. "I can't accept this," she said. "You already did 20 years ago when I gave you that patch. This is just making it official." The SEAL Trident sat in Nomad's palm, small and heavy with meaning. The room full of special operators watched in silence. These men, trained in violence and comfortable with hardship, understood the weight of symbols. This wasn't just a piece of metal, it was recognition, acceptance, the kind of honor that transcended service branches and spoke to something deeper. "I've carried this since retirement," Ironside continued. "It represented what I was, what I'd accomplished. But tonight I realized it represents something more, the bond between warriors who trust each other completely. You earned that trust. You embody what this trident stands for." Nomad looked around the room, saw nods of agreement. These men, SEALs who'd spent careers in the most demanding units in the military, were offering acceptance into their brotherhood. The gesture was profound. "I accept it," she said quietly. "Not because I've earned it the way you did, but because refusing would dishonor the trust you're offering. Thank you." They raised glasses, drank to absent friends and past operations. The evening continued with more stories, more laughter, the easy camaraderie of people who'd shared danger and survived. But Nomad kept returning to the trident in her hand, feeling its weight, understanding that this moment represented something significant about her career and identity. She'd spent 20 years flying close air support, protecting ground forces, making split-second decisions that determined who lived and died. She'd sacrificed promotions and command opportunities to maintain stability for her daughter. She trained hundreds of pilots, written tactical doctrine, shaped how the Air Force thought about the close air support mission. And now, at what felt like the culmination of that journey, she was being recognized not by her own service, but by the warriors she'd protected. The next morning, nursing a mild hangover and drinking bad hotel coffee, Nomad sat with Ironside on the beach. The Pacific stretched to the horizon, gray and cold and eternal. "Tell me honestly," she said. "That night, did you think we were going to make it out?" Ironside considered the question. "There was a moment, maybe 30 seconds before you made that low-altitude gun run when I accepted that we were going to die there. Not fear exactly, just acceptance. This is how it ends. What changed? The sound of the A-10's engines, then the sound of the GAU-8, then watching the compound come apart. I went from acceptance to hope in about 3 seconds. He picked up a piece of driftwood, examined it. You know what I think about most from that night? Not the violence, not the fear, the certainty. The absolute certainty that you weren't going to leave us, that you'd stay overhead until we were safe or you ran out of fuel, whichever came first. That was always the deal, Nomad said. Ground forces trust that air support will be.